Charting Toward Intimacy covers mature topics. Listener discretion is advised. Today, we are going to be talking about one of the most important requirements of any relationship, but particularly that of a married sexual relationship. I might even argue that it is the most important requirement of a married relationship. So let's dive into what it is. Welcome to Charting Toward Intimacy, the sex and intimacy podcast for Catholic women. My name is Ellen Holloway, and I am a Catholic speaker and coach who specializes in sex and marital intimacy, and I am on a mission to help you actually enjoy and desire good, holy sex with your spouse. And joining me today is my amazing, semi-regular co-host, Kathleen Chavanis.
Today, we're going to be empathetic.
We are going to be empathetic. We're going to be processing empathy. Inside, outside, upside down.
So empathy is a requirement of relationships. And empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. That's like, dictionary definition. Literally just Googled it. So I just read that off of the Google page.
Can you repeat it one more time just so we can really let it sink in?
Yes. Empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. So this applies to friendships, to family members, like having empathy is necessary in order to have a relationship. One way that empathy, I remember being explained to me like when I was younger, is walking in another person's shoes. I think a lot of people have heard that phrase before, but it's seeing the world, seeing the situation from the side of the other person and like recognizing that while that might not be how you're feeling and experiencing it, it's okay that that person is feeling and experiencing it in that way. And this is particularly necessary in marriage because marriage includes, by default, right? Marriage includes that sexual act. This is a sex and intimacy podcast. We're going to talk about sex. Because the married relationship includes sex, there is a deeper level of vulnerability and intimacy than any other human relationship. And that means that empathy, the ability to understand and share the feelings of another, is even more necessary in the married relationship that includes like a sexual relationship.
Yeah. I want to point out that you said that, it's okay that your spouse might be feeling way different from the way that you are feeling. But I think in the married relationship, it's important to also add that not only is it okay, but that as their spouse, where you have entered into a spiritual covenant, right, where you have promised to love this person to heaven, essentially, right, it also, not only is it okay, but it creates this, there's also then this requirement for you to meet them where they're at and to begin to find compromise, right? Like to really see them there in their pain and not just like accept it like, okay, this is how they're feeling and I don't feel that way, so I'm just going to let you feel that and not complain about it. Like it's so much more than that. You actually need to then enter into that pain with them, and it becomes your responsibility to almost help alleviate it, right? Like, okay, well, what can we, ultimately, like, we are not responsible for, like, everything, taking care of everything for our spouse. That's like, God is responsible for filling a lot of the gaps and all of these things. But if there is something particularly about your sexual relationship, right, that they are feeling that you are not, I think we really need to take the opportunity to meet them there in that pain, to see where they are and to say, okay, this is like a joint thing, right? Like, so how can we work together to fix this.
Right.
Does that make sense?
And doing that, I just want to like clarify that a little bit more, right? Being empathetic does not mean just giving into whatever the request was.
Correct. Yeah.
So let's say that your husband came to you in the middle of the day and like a couple of kids are upstairs and is like, hey, like, should we go to the bedroom? And this is just like, it's just not a good time for you. Like, that's just, you know, I think there are a lot of women that like, that does not create a safe and comfortable environment to have sex, is if like kids are awake and doing stuff. And so you are not required to say yes in that situation in order to be empathetic. But you are required to be empathetic to the fact that your husband desires you right now, and you saying no is going to hurt. It is. Like, that is just a true statement. And so, no, you don't have to go up to the bedroom and go have sex at a time that is just very inopportune or uncomfortable for you. But you might need to sit in that sucky feeling together and recognize what your no is going to feel like to your husband, and maybe sit down and chat and be like, okay, let's solve this together. Let's, you know, actually work on a real compromise. You obviously want to have sex right now. You know, that sounds fine if the situation was different, right? If there weren't a couple of kids upstairs right now. And, you know, so when can we have sex next? And when would it be comfortable and appropriate for me? And, you know, whatever that conversation looks like. And so I just wanted to kind of clarify what Kathleen was saying, that like your role as a spouse is to be empathetic. Like, that is a part of your relationship. And that is something that you can and should expect from your spouse as well. And I think that's a standard that you can hold your spouse to. And that's a conversation that you can have about the need for your spouse to be empathetic in, you know, situations that are flipped. But here's the thing, ladies, or anyone listening, we can only change ourselves. We can only change ourselves. I'm going to say it one more time. We can only change ourselves. And if you want to have a healthy relationship, then that means you have to put forward all of the pieces to a healthy relationship, even if you're not receiving them back at this point in time.
Yeah.
But that is what being in a married relationship is. And yeah, it might kind of suck that maybe you're extending a lot of empathy, but you're not feeling it back. And I'm so sorry if that's the situation that you are currently in with your spouse. But truly, we only have the ability to change ourselves. And so what that might take for your current situation, if you have a more painful situation, a painful relationship that's not open and honest and empathetic on both sides, it might take a lot of mindset shifting and learning how to have peace in the fact that it isn't it isn't the relationship that you want, right? It isn't the relationship that you desire.
Yeah.
But I want to guarantee you that you being empathetic, and again, it's not giving in to every want and desire of your spouse. Empathy is different. Empathy is understanding and sharing the feelings. It's not the actions. Empathy has nothing to do with actions. You being empathetic is only going to help your relationship. You being empathetic is never going to be a negative thing.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. Something that I think is important to say is that, or to kind of call out, is that I think, and this isn't like across the board, obviously, like relationships are different, life situations are different, everything. But I think it is highly common for the wives or women in a relationship to sort of feel like the ones who are burnt out. Like they're the ones kind of keeping all the balls in the air, right? Like whether you're working or you're staying at home, like you're the one who's just constantly moving, people constantly need you. You're, taking care of food and groceries and dinner. You're getting everyone to practice. You're getting everyone to appointments. Like you're the one they need to get to sleep, right? Like you've got to put them down. Like you are just needed for so many things over the course of a day that by the end of the day, you're just burnt out. Like this happens, I think this is like a very common thing, and that men don't experience that nearly as much as women do. And because of that, I think we fall into this sort of justification lie where we just kind of say, well, of course, it's very easy for us to just say, I'm too tired. Like, I can't right now. Like, I'm exhausted. And yeah, of course I'm exhausted. Like, look at all I did today. Look at all I had to take care of. Look at all the fires I had to put out, right? Like, of course and so we justify this sort of like lower libido that we have because it's just like, well, of course, like how can you expect me to just do one more thing for you? And like I will kind of call myself out here. Like I absolutely get to this place. But I think amidst my struggles in my sex life and my husband and I kind of working to kind of come to like, just to kind of meet each other where we're at, like I've had to realize that he does not feel that way, right? Like and at the end of the day, even if it's been a hard day, like a lot of the times he just wants to like be in the presence and the comfort of his wife through the sexual embrace, right? Like, and at the end of a day for me, that's been hard. I'm just like, just let me lay down and pass out. Like that's right. Like, I just want to lay here and die slowly. Like just let me do that, But that when I sort of go to my place and basically say to him, no, I can't, sorry, like not here for it. Like that affects him, because it's like we're seeking respite in two different ways. And he gives me like my rest. I mean, so freely and so often. And I've realized that I don't give it to him nearly as much as he gives it to me. And I've had to be honest, like that's taken like a really hard look in the mirror to realize that like, wow, he is a lot better to me than I am to him. Right. And so, and I think that the culture sort of like chats with girlfriends and stuff, right? Like will reveal the same thing. Like your girlfriend will kind of like puff you up. Like, yeah, of course. Like he cannot expect one more thing of you. That is insane. You're allowed to be tired. You're allowed to say no, but we're looking for justification and we're rejecting empathy. We're refusing to do that hard look in the mirror to say, yeah, but you know what? Like he gives me my rest more often than I give him his, right? Like, and I think that's something that we really need to just find. And again, it's not just like, oh yeah, just say yes every time, even if you don't feel like it. I think these are things that take really hard conversations. Like, hey, when is it an absolute no? Like, what are the times and the moments and the situations where it's just like, you cannot be present to this, right? Because like, then maybe we avoid those. But like, what are the times that maybe you don't feel like it, but you know that with some pursuit, you'll be able to be there. You'll be able to enjoy, right? Like, because maybe those are the times that you need to give in and give him his respite, right?
We'll be back with the episode in just a minute. Thank you so much for being here and for being a listener of this podcast. I hear from so many of you all the time via email or via Instagram that this podcast or maybe a specific episode has really blessed you and blessed your marriage. And I am so happy that that is what is happening with this podcast. I have a request for you. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please head over to iTunes and leave a review for this podcast. Those reviews help other people find this podcast and benefit from it as well. Ratings are great, but the reviews are absolute gold. So please, if you have a minute, head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review for Charting Toward Intimacy.
I think two things is like when we are, what you were saying about like the girlfriend chat, right? Mm-hmm. When we're sitting on that side, we are shoving empathy out the window and we're embracing selfishness ultimately.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And a healthy marriage, you gotta put selfishness away, a long ways away. Mm-hmm. And that's part of, I mean, that's just growing in a deep, intimate relationship, is not being selfish. And the other thing is that I think a lot of times we just forget, or maybe we haven't even heard it before, and that there are two different kinds of desire, and people function differently depending on what type of desire you experience. There is spontaneous desire and there is responsive desire. And if you experience spontaneous desire, that's what we think of when we think of sexual desire. Like that's what you see in the movies. That's just, thought pops into your head and you're like, yep, I'm ready to go.
It's out of nowhere.
Out of nowhere. Responsive desire, which is roughly 50% of the population, is that you're not actually going to physically desire sex until you have some sort of external physical stimuli. Yeah. That means people who experience responsive desire are not going to actually even want to physically have sex until well into foreplay. Mm-hmm. Until you're 5 or 10 minutes in, and then you're like, oh, okay, actually, yeah, that sounds pretty good, right? And so often, so many women are just like, I just never want to have sex. I wonder if there's something wrong with my libido. And it's like, it's probably that you have responsive desire, and that we actually need to tap into a deeper desire to have sex, a desire that is focused more on the spiritual and unitive aspects of sex, of the desire to unite with our spouse and have a beautiful, unitive, comforting, loving embrace.
Yeah.
Even though we're not feeling it, right? There's no heat. There's no, there's not that passionate feeling. That's totally normal. And I think that's just sort of tangential to this relationship. But sometimes we just I think us ladies need a little slap in the face of girl, you can say yes to sex even if you don't really feel like it. You can. Yeah. And actually, once you get into a little bit, you might really enjoy it. And there's nothing wrong with you if you're not feeling it right when you get started. There's nothing wrong with saying yes, even if you don't really feel like having sex. There's nothing wrong with initiating, even if you don't really feel like having sex. I think the important thing is kind of making sure that you and your husband both understand that concept. Yeah. So I think sometimes for people who have spontaneous desire, it's hard to fathom responsive desire. And that's an aspect of empathy that's needed, right? And that's an aspect of empathy. If you're in the situation of being someone with responsive desire, that's an aspect that you can hold your spouse accountable to recognize and understand. Look, this is how it is. You need to be okay with that.
Yeah.
But also, if you're the spouse with the responsive desire, just honestly, you don't have to physically be already ready for sex when you say yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sex includes foreplay. Sex is not just straight to intercourse. Sex should not be that. If that's the case, you need to take my sex course, the Catholic sex course for women, and you and your husband need to watch it together. If you are going straight to intercourse, you have a problem. That is not a full sexual act. And that's not healthy, honestly. Yeah. I'm just going to say it as it is.
Call it like it is.
It's not helpful for the woman's body. The woman's body needs foreplay, literally needs foreplay It needs time to get okay, anyway.
Yeah, no, and I think that you're right though that if you're a woman with responsive desire and you have a husband with spontaneous desire, right? Like that isn't something they easily understand. So, your point, like, don't be afraid to initiate. Yeah, it takes a lot of effort, I think, for someone with responsive desire to initiate. You have to be so intentional, but it doesn't mean you can't do it. What does need to happen is a conversation with your husband that just because I'm initiating doesn't mean I'm just ready to go. Like and it's almost like, I don't know, some people might feel differently about this, particularly men with spontaneous desire, but I see it as like even more of a gift of self when you are taking that, like that, when you are making that intentional effort to initiate, right? Even though you aren't just like ready and ready to rock and roll right away. It's just an incredible gift of ourselves that we can give to our spouses, right? But you will need to clarify, right? Like sometimes when you're initiating, it's just assumed, all right, she's good. Like let's get this thing going, and you got to be like, nope, that's not how it works.
Important conversation to like lay out.
Exactly. Yes, that is an important thing to lay out, but it doesn't make you any less interested, right? Like it's just that your body works a little bit differently, and that is something that just needs to be clarified.
We got a little off track on the whole empathy thing, but I think that was an important like sort of addition to this empathy conversation.
Well, yeah, because it's your husband having empathy for you then, right? Like it's all tied into how we can experience and approach empathy with each other from both sides, I think.
Well, and I think that's something important to maybe just as we sort of close out this episode is, we talked at the beginning, we talked a lot about how the spouse with lower desire typically is going to need to really put forth a lot of empathy when it comes to initiating. But that does not say that the spouse with higher desire isn't also called to empathy. So if you are sitting here and you're like, yeah, okay, I'm the spouse with higher desire. My spouse needs to give me a lot of empathy. Yeah, you also need to give your spouse a lot of empathy. You don't get a free pass here simply because you have higher desire.
Yeah.
Like, think about it this way. Let's say Jane is very hungry. And James, I should have chosen different names. Jane and Michael. How about that? It's like, those are too close.
Love that. Yeah. Much better. Yeah.
Jane and Michael. Confused. That's even weirder because that's the brother and sister from Mary Poppins. Okay.
Oh my gosh. I don't know how many other people would have thought about that. How about Jane and John?
Jane and John. Okay. All right. So let's say that Jane is really hungry and John isn't. John just, like, he's just not hungry. And Jane says, hey, let's go to lunch. And John says, no, because he's not hungry.
Yeah.
Like, Jane can't just go and sulk. Oh my gosh, my husband doesn't want to go to lunch with me. He doesn't want to go on a date. He doesn't want, he doesn't want to spend time with me. No, John said no because he wasn't hungry. He didn't say no because he didn't want to spend time with you. Right? And then on the flip side, right, John needs to be empathetic to the fact that Jane is hungry. Like she needs to eat. Right? So him saying no, like that hurt because she's like, I have this need. Like I have this deep desire to eat because I'm really hungry right now. Right? And so John needs to be empathetic to Jane that she's requesting to go out to lunch and she knows that like John might not be that hungry. And so it's like that interaction, and obviously you can see the parallels here. I'm just trying to be a little silly, right? But that interaction, those two can leave that interaction both feeling crappy about it, right? Jane can leave the interaction going, John doesn't want to spend time with me. He doesn't want to go on a date. He doesn't care about my needs. John can leave the conversation going, Jane didn't even pay attention. I don't want to go to lunch. I'm not hungry. She never listens to me, right? Or they can end the conversation in a really healthy way. Jane says, hey, let's go to lunch. John says, you know what? I'm not very hungry. Are you really hungry right now? Yeah, I'm actually really hungry. Well, I have time right now, and I'll just get something small, or maybe I'll just have a coffee with you, right? Like,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They can decide to go and spend the time, and now is where the example does not compute, right? Like Jane could eat on her own, but that doesn't.
No, Jane can't eat on her own. Yeah.
No. Okay, not a perfect parallel, but
no,
you can see
that's
how,
okay.
Like, a simple example like that, there is a difference in how we react to our wants and our needs in that situation.
Yeah.
And that's empathy, is when you receive a request that you're like, no, I don't want that at all. Instead of just shutting it down, like allowing it to be a conversation. That's not something that I want right now, but tell me more about your wants here, right? Or that's not something I can even fathom to do right now, right? Let's say that Jane said, let's go to lunch. And John's like, I have a meeting in 10 minutes. I literally can't go to lunch with you, but I could go in an hour. Are you interested in that? And Jane's like, yeah, I could drink a glass of water and wait it out right now. Again, still not a perfect example here.
Yeah. It's so funny though, because I feel like every analogy, like we try to make, like there's always so many food analogies to sex, because it's just another appetite, right? But like it's always food.
And the analogy always falls apart toward the end too.
Yeah. It's just great though. It's great.
But it's truly recognizing what is really going on in this situation, because it's never just one thing. It's never just my husband wants sex and I don't want sex. Like it's never just that. Sex is so deeply intimate, so deeply vulnerable. It is always more. It's always, there's a like physical component to it. There is a spiritual component to it. There's an emotional component to it. And when we don't, just recognize all of those pieces to the puzzle, and we just kind of like shoot it down with no empathy, we're really hurting. We're hurting an opportunity to communicate. We're hurting an opportunity to unite, even if we don't even have sex, right? Like we're missing a wonderful opportunity of growing in intimacy.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for listening. If you are not already following us on Instagram, be sure to check us out at Charting Toward Intimacy. And if you listen to podcasts on a platform that gives you the option to rate or review, we'd love for you to do that, because it helps us spread the word about the podcast. If you ever have questions, comments, or episode topic ideas, please reach out to us. We love to hear from you. You can reach out on Instagram or send us an email. Our email is in the show notes. Until next time.